שלנו היא דוקטור שלי אלקיים. המשוררת שלי אלקיים היא ממקימי תנועת... מה? כל מה שאני אומרת נכון. המשוררת שלי אלקיים היא ממקימי תנועת המזרח על השלום. היא פעילה ב30 השנים האחרונות להבנה בין דתית במסגרות ישראליות ובינלאומיות. חוקרת קבלה במרכז מוסיוף לחקר הקבלה באוניברסיטת בר אילן, חוקרת דתות בחוג להיסטוריה של הדתות באוניברסיטת גטינגן, ומשתתפת בקבוצות מחקר שונות בנושאים על פואטיקה, פיוט ומזרח במכון ונדיר בירושלים.
תודה רבה נורית. חביבה ביקשה ממני לדבר את ההרצאה באנגלית, אז כתבתי הרצאה, אני לא מאמינה בתרגומים, אז כלומר בתרגומים ליטרליים, אז פשוט ישבתי וכתבתי הרצאה חדשה, ואני בעצם רוצה להודות לך חביבה, תמיד יש לך רעיונות נועזים ויצירתיים וחיוביים, ואני מקווה שהם לא אכזב אותך היום בהרצאה. I want first to thank the Gurion University of the Negev and those people outside of the university who established J.R. Elyashar Center for the Studies of the Jewish Heritage of Sephardi and Hamzrach. I'm thankful as well to the organizing committee of this conference on models of leadership and identities then and now for inviting me to address to this important gathering about my theme of East for Peace, consciousness, peacemaking, and interreligious understanding. Your invitation allowed me to take a short break from my academic field, the study of 16th century Rabbi Israel Majara, described by Elyashar as one of the greatest figures in Judaism. Today, I will return to an earlier period of my life when I had worked with Elyashar and was later on the founding members of Hamizrach el Shalom, East for Peace movement. In my presentation, I will try to make advantage of the time that elapsed and perspective gained in order to address two main subjects. The first would be to present a short overview of Elyashar philosophy, suggesting that his worldview contributed immensely to the intellectual foundation of the East for Peace. I will also demonstrate that Elyashar was a pioneering intellectual and stood indeed at the cutting edge of the global anthropological and post-colonial discourse. The second part of my presentation will focus on the movement itself, trying to assess in what ways could it be considered as realization of its great precursor, and in what ways, such as the coming of the term Mizrachim, it departed from Elyashar's heritage. I will argue that the East for Peace was readily accepted in intellectual circles in the West because it was part of that post-colonial discourse pioneered by Elyashar. Both Elyashar and the East for Peace movement served as the voice of the Mizrahi and Palestinians subaltern in Israel. Elyashar pioneering philosophy. Since the beginning, I treated East for Peace as an auto-emancipation movement, bringing a new consciousness to the fore. But I was wrong. This consciousness had been already set by people such as Elyashar, Nissim Gaon, and my father, Elkayim, who had been Sephardic Palestinian Jewish, if you will, an activist who played an important role in the 1959 Wadi Salib revolt. East for Peace philosophy revolved around the idea that peace in the Middle East entails integration in the region, arguing that the Mizrachim should become a bridge for a regional peace. In retrospect, it is clear, however, that East for Peace philosophical vision of peace was not as innovative as described by some scholars. This philosophy represented the views of the intellectuals of the Sephardic Old Yishuv, Hayishuv HaYashan, whose best spokesperson was probably Elyashar. Elyashar, 1899 to 1981, was grandchild of two important rabbis and the entrepreneur who built for us the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway in 1890 and 1892. I mean, in 2 years, he did the whole railway to Jerusalem, and it took the municipality of Jerusalem to build the Rekevet HaKala, I don't know how many years. And the railway of Navon Bay, it took them 11 years to build, and they're still building it. While Navon Bay in 2 years made the work that's still so workable. So he was a grandson of Navon Bay. Among his occupations, we could mention a medical doctor, an Ottoman army officer fighting the jihad against the British in the First World War, an official in the British Palestine, a Knesset member, and a leader of Israel's Sephardic Jews. As I will subsequently show, he was also a groundbreaking intellectual. Elyashar was a man of solidarity, supportive and asking for cooperations. Together with Nissim Gaon of the World Sephardi Federation and with the Hebrew University, he established the Misgav Yerushalayim Institute for research on the Sephardic and Oriental Jewish heritage. I remember meeting Avraham Chaim and Saadia Marziano at the home, actually at the office inside the home of Elyashar on Jabotinsky Street in Tel Aviv. Chava Elyashar and I became close friends. I visited her quite often. When she was talking about her husband, her blue eyes were shining. Apart from his career as public leader and Knesset member, 1949 to 1955, Elyashar is the author of groundbreaking books, including We Must Prevent Jewish Racism in the Jewish State. This was February 1967. Another book, Living with Palestinians, as was mentioned before, 1975, and another book which Chaviva showed us earlier. Actually, I have to. Living with the Jews, and this is the Living with the Jews, and it's a very huge book, חובה עלינו למנוע גזענות יהודית במדינת היהודים, and Living with the Palestinians. In his writings, Elyashar was clearly a Zionist who, though critically writing about Zionist policies, his criticism came yet, and I'm quoting Israel Bartal, yet from a Zionist worldview and from a pro-Israeli position. He suggested the principle of solving the Palestinian refugee problem by presenting the Mizrahi population exchange. But this should be presented, he said, by a Mizrahi to the Arabs, not by an Ashkenazi. Indeed, my thesis today in this speech would be that Elyashar was probably more advanced than any Israeli intellectual of his time. I believe he was influenced by Martin Luther King's vision that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. This can be seen in the title of Elyashar's books. It is our obligation to prevent Jewish racism in the Jewish state, 1967. In the book, which displays intimate knowledge with the current intellectual discourse on culture, Elyashar argues that there is no one general culture that could be accepted as the culture basis for all humanity. It is all completely relative. To bolster his argument, he quotes leading American anthropologist Ruth Benedict. One cannot compare cultures to each other on an ethnical, moral basis and grant each of them according to norms widespread in the science of Western civilization, but simply as units who should coexist together, all having valid life for their environment. Before moving to the applicability of Benedict's thoughts to the Israeli-Ashkenazi-Sephardi debate and to the post-colonial paradigm in Elyashar's argument, it is proper to say a few words about Benedict's and her intellectual sources. Ruth Benedict, along with Margaret Mead, another leading 20th century anthropologist, was a student of Franz Boas, the German Jewish scholar considered both the father of modern anthropology and the father of American anthropology. He was the first, already in 1887, to develop the concept of cultural relativism, not to be mixed with moral relativism, as the methodological foundation for anthropology. Cultural relativism demonstrates that cultures and civilizations growing in different geographical contexts have each their own value and should be understood in their own context. Put clearly, there is no supreme Western culture. Both uncompromising struggle with racism, both that directed at Jews in Europe and that against African Americans in the US, emanated from his scientific worldview that heavily influenced Ruth Benedict, and indeed Elyashar. In her 1934 Patterns of Culture, Benedict wonders, how is it that in all fields of experimental science, researchers look for the variety in order to understand the whole, and only in the social science, scholars tend to overemphasize, quote, the local variation that of the Western civilization. Elyashar wholeheartedly adopted Boas and Benedict's cultural relativism. As I quoted before, he insists that everything is relative indeed, yet his argument is more when it comes to the Jewish people. On the one hand, he maintains that the Jews are one people, and indeed the Jews as a whole constitute a Mizrahi people. Everyone who belongs to the Jewish people originates from the children of Shem and is therefore a Mizrahi regardless of all the transformations that we have experienced during our long wanderings. He further reasons that there is no racial difference among the Jews. We all belong to the Mediterranean family. Our past, faith, vision, hopes, and more form the background which unite us as one people in Israel. The last quotation brings to mind Rachel Elior's recent description of the Jewish people as a community of memory, Keilat Zikaron, most likely following the American sociologist of religions Robert Bellah and the Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit. On the other hand, Elyashar explains that while the Jews are indeed one people, they lived for a long period of time, hundreds of years, within different cultures and adopted many of their traits. This history created the wide differences, indeed alienations, among the children of the various aliyot, whose number reaches almost the number of all countries of the world. And here we are, things are connected to the Chagiga that Meir Buzaglo spoke about before. Elyashar is really calling, in the way I read it, he's calling to celebrate the differences, to rejoice in the differences. Hence, there is no room, according to Elyashar, to impose one particular culture, that of Western civilization, on this great variety of Jewish cultures. His argument is again nuanced and sophisticated, proceeding and avoiding the pitfalls of latter post-colonial and post-Zionist criticism. He precedes the post-colonial school by pointing to the connection between the policies and the Ashkenazi establishment and the colonial and imperialistic reality of the world in the modern age. The powers that were in the Zionist movement, in the Yishuv, and then in the State of Israel, he asserts, think as many thinkers used to think in Europe, that culture is one and supreme above the rest, and that is their own culture, the Western one, which the colonialist people tries to instill in all the people and tribes that they had succeeded in subjugating. He then compares the educational policies in Israel to the British civilization mission in colonialized India, initiated by reformist British statesman Thomas Macaulay. The leaders of Israel, states Elyashar, wish to enforce a Jewish Ashkenazi culture and ignore the Sephardic and Oriental culture, as if trying to fulfill Lord Macaulay's desire as regards India, to form a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinion, in morals, and in intellect. Elyashar, a contemporary of Martin Nickborn, psychiatrist Frantz Fanon, Nigerian author Achebe, an American civil rights leader Martin Luther King, and preceded Palestinian American intellectual Edward Said, Indian American intellectuals such as the liberty theorist Gayatri Chakra Vorti Spivak, who wrote the Subalter Speak in 1988, Homi Baba, and Mizrahi post-Zionists such as Ella Shochat, Nissim Rajwan, Smadar Lavi, Vicky Shiran, and Yehuda Shenhab. Yet he avoided the pitfalls of both Orientalism and Occidentalism by accepting all cultures and shunning reductionism. He understood all well that there was no one Western civilization to be imposed, since culture is dynamic and ever-changing in time and place. Therefore, he ridiculed the Ashkenazi leadership, quote, "It is a folly that our Ashkenazi brethren who made Aliyah to Israel from Jewish townships in the Pale of Settlement, Chuma Moshav, in Central and Eastern Europe, where no tolerance exists and where there had been persecuted up to the neck, pretend now that they are all Western Europeans and that is the reason for their superiority." End of quote. Similarly, he avoids the obsessive anti-Zionism of the young post-colonial Israeli scholars. Heaven forbid, Khalilali, that I would diminish even one iota from what the national movement and the government of Israel have done for the ingathering of the exiles, helping them to ascend to the land, settle them down, educating them, providing livelihood, and so on and so forth. I was deeply involved since 1980 with Mizrahi students in the Israeli University due to my position as national coordinator of student projects, which had been part of the leadership program of the Department of Sephardi Communities in the diaspora, a joint project of the World Sephardi Federation and the World Zionist Organization. I believe now that due to this activity, I was invited to meet with Eli Elyashar in his home. East for Peace was a social and ideological movement looking to integrate Israel in the Middle East, a region where Israel is located, and with which it shares so much common heritage and culture. The movement was looking to integration as an essential condition for the survival of Israel in this very region. We, Mizrahi intellectuals from across the country, established the movement in 1983. Wow. אני רק התחלתי על המזרח אל השלום. We held meetings. אוקיי, בסדר. אז, אוקיי. אולי נדבר על המזרח אל השלום פעם אחרת. Maybe I should speak about East for Peace another time. No, now. Okay. Okay, we held meetings in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv in early 1983. I'm jumping, okay, to make it in 5 minutes. East for Peace included members of Oded movement, of Mapam party, Communist party, and mainly of Oded movement established in Paris in 1962 by the Zionist Moroccan youth. Chief among them was Knesset member Mordechai El-Grabli and Dr. Shlomo Elbaz. These activists felt rejected by the largely Ashkenazi Peace Now movement established in 1978 to support the Israeli-Egyptian peace process, but becoming particularly relevant following the beginning of the First Lebanon War in 1982. These French-speaking Mizrahi intellectuals demonstrated within the ranks of the Peace Now movement, but could not avoid feeling that they had been patronized, marginalized, and indeed rejected. I, for one, never participated in the Peace Now activities, knowing all too well the nature of that group, but served in a series of meetings with the Francophone group as a good listener, a wailing wall, if you will, for their complaints and frustration. One of their complaints related to them not being included in the Peace Now announcements in the press. I soon realized that their goal was first to ventilate and then to finance and publish an advertisement in the newspaper in support of, quote, the peace process and to combat the stereotype that, end of quote, that was then widely spread by the Israeli left-wing leadership, as if as Sephardim were in favor of war and Arab haters. Indeed, this image proved to be an effective tool for Ashkenazi fundraising in the US for the professed goal of educating Sephardim for peace. I could not believe my ears that the purpose of all these long meetings in Jerusalem were just to advertise, and that we, the Sephardi intellectuals, needed to pay for it. I recall saying to them, the newspapers should not ask for us for money, for we are creating important news. We should write a manifesto and handle it to them, to the media, and spread it everywhere. End of quote. My idea was that we should work to change Israel in politics and social norms of treating Arabs and Mizrahim as inferior and as primitive. I stressed the need for an all-out reform in the Israeli school curriculum as part of our efforts to build a culture of peace via teaching of Arabic and via teaching the history of the Middle East. They all looked at me. Then some said, go ahead, write a manifesto. I started by taking a representative of the Oded movement and someone from the student activists from Tel Aviv, whom I invited to meet us in Jerusalem. We based our arguments on the Declaration of Independence, on the spirit of the prophets of Israel. In hindsight, one could tell that we followed the footsteps of Martin Luther King. Indeed, King led a movement that was rooted in a prophetic worldview based on universal values, and that his vision was outlined in the American Declaration of Independence. This is perhaps the right place to note that we did this in early 1983, while Elyashar, as I pointed out earlier in my talk, was using this discourse already in the 60s. East for Peace called for Mizrahi consciousness, seeing Mizrahim as native to the Middle East region. We called Israel to integrate itself in the Middle East. We called for a peace process in the Middle East. We called to keep the Jewish nature of the state. We asked to support the political, economical, and cultural integration of Israel in the Middle East. We combat the allegation that Jews of Hamizrach were extremists, violent, and negative about peace. We wanted to further out our political consciousness, firstly by defining ourselves as Mizrahim, as I was calling the Oriental Jews of Israel. Few words about the term Mizrahim. Proper here. I was the first to use this term, but the credit for coining it goes to my father, Elkayam, who funded my activities at the time, being a Sephardi activist himself. Following my father's advice, I started every interview and every meeting with the expression, Ani Mizrachit, or Anachnu Mizrachim. I am Mizrachit, we are Mizrachim. And so it came that the East for Peace movement, departing even from Elyashar, I introduced the term Mizrahim into the Israeli discourse. By early 1983, at my request, our meetings expanded to Tel Aviv. I invited a number of groups and activists. One of them was the Hila group from Hatikva. This is Vicky Shiran. Quarter in South Tel Aviv, not to be mixed, by the way, with the educational Hila, which emerged later on. I invited Shlomo Bar, a Brera TV musical group, and at the World Sephardic Federation to join us. Our first meeting was at Shlomo Bar's office. Our second meeting was at the house of Chaim and Vicky Shiran, and there Vicky Shiran urged to establish the movement. She also wanted me to be the chair, and I said that we need no chairperson. So she said, okay, then you'll be the spokesperson. And so I became the spokesperson of the East for Peace movement from Ahad Ha'am Street meeting in May 1983. I want to jump to the conclusion. In short, Elyashar was a pioneering intellectual, well-versed in the global, multicultural, and post-colonial discourses, who proved himself to be more sophisticated and outgoing than later generations. He was able to see the universal picture of the colonial and post-colonial world alongside the particular nuances. Hence, he defined Judaism as a people, a community of memory, having a national movement, but is also deeply multicultural, suffering from the vestiges of Western colonialism. While he did not use the term Mizrahi, which my father coined later during the East for Peace activities in the 80s, he did see the Israeli cultural and political scene as including two major civilizations, Western and Eastern, both multicultural and both equally important for the health of Israel and regional peace. I tried today to show that East for Peace combined foreign relations with Arabs and internal relations within Israel, based not only on political military arguments, but rather on universal ideas that came from moral Jewish values. Elyashar was the source of inspiration for such ideas that he expressed in his books. I did not include in my presentation his criticism of the constant bickering among Sephardi Jews, but drawing on my experience, his observation is right on target and will be discussed in my written paper. I argued that Sephardic leadership is combating racism since the Wadi Salib revolt in 1959, and that Mizrahi leadership holds a concept that regional peace should revolve from values of equality and from building a culture of social justice inside the state. Thank you very much.
שלי. אני רוצה להגיד משהו אישי, ככה על המפגש הראשוני שלי עם מרכז אלישר. כשהגעתי לפה לפני כמה שנים טובות ללמוד לתואר ראשון לקמפוס, אז הייתי מהגרת צעירה מצפון אפריקה, וכבר הייתי כמה שנים בארץ, אבל ממש לא התמקמתי, ועדיין נעתי בין שפות, והרגשתי כזאת זרות עצומה, ולא הכרתי פה ממש נפש חיה. לא שהסתדרתי יותר טוב עכשיו, אבל באותם שנים זה היה באמת ככה, הייתי ממש בהלם. ואני זוכרת שפעם לפני עידן המיילים והמחשוב, היו מפרסמים את הרשימה של הקורסים הכלליים ליד האב בית, נכון? וזה היה מין קיר כזה גדול שעד היום זה קיים, כן? עדיין קיים, והמשרדים של המרכז היו ממש איפה שהפקולטה, נכון? ואני זוכרת שגם חיפשתי סוגים של ידע ומה אני רוצה ללמוד, ובכלל לא ממש... ועמדתי שם מול כל הרשימה וראיתי את הקורסים של המרכז. ולמדתי קורסים נפלאים במרכז, וסוף סוף היה משהו על יהודי צפון אפריקה, מוזיקה מזרחית, פיוט, יהדות ספרד, וככה מאוד מאוד התרגשתי, ואני זוכרת שלקחתי קורס, אני זוכרת את הקורס הראשון שלקחתי היה קורס על הקבלה של רבי חיים בן עטר, אצל דן מנור, וזה היה פשוט ממש מדהים. ואחר כך, בכלל הייתי נכנסת לקורסים בלי להיות רשומה בכלל. אני זוכרת את הקורסים של אילם המזלג על הפיוט והמוזיקה המזרחית. פשוט, מרכז אלישר במובנים רבים, ממש ככה, היה חוויית לימוד מכוננת בשבילי. ועכשיו אני ממש, יש לי פנים שאני יכולה להגיד להם שלום, קולונל אליישר ופרופסור מוריס רומני, באמת ככה, זה היה מאוד מאוד חשוב, ככה זה היה מתווה דרך ומכונן מאוד בשבילי, המפגש